Well, hey everyone, Hudson here. In this approach in the scene, I'm going to talk about a couple images that I captured last Saturday while I was out on the beautiful North Oregon coast doing some kiteboarding. I'm going to just talk about capturing an HDR panorama and then kind of an image that I just came upon by chance at the HDR Shipwreck in Fort Stevens State Park when I was getting ready to leave, go home. I wasn't really planning on going out to do any landscape shooting. I happen to have the stuff that I needed in the car. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I captured the image, and it's an HDR image with a different foreground of the ocean kind of blended into it, and I'll talk about my thought process in capturing it and do a start to finish edit of putting that whole thing together in Lightroom and Photoshop. For those of you that haven't been watching, this is Approaching the Scene. It's a series of weekly videos that I do on everything photographic, from capturing better images out in the field to post-processing, getting the most out of the images, to conversations with other photographers about what they're doing and what their imagery is and the state of technology in the photographic industry as a whole. So, above all, I want it to be a conversation, and I'd love to have you join in. So leave your comments on the YouTube channel's comments, or you can send me a question at questions@hudsonhenry.com. So this last weekend, amazing Friday and Saturday, I took the kids out skiing again, did some cross-country skiing, and took my little 2-year-old Pike downhill again up at Mount Hood, and then unpacked the car from all the ski gear and packed a whole bunch of stuff into my Subaru Outback and headed for the coast with a couple of friends, a few friends, to do a day of kiteboarding up at right where the mouth of the Columbia River comes out between Oregon and Washington. There's kind of a little back eddy pond there in Fort Stevens State Park on the Oregon side that in east winds works really, really well in the winter. And so, we geared up lots of warm, wet suits, and I actually have a little dry suit. And we headed up there, and I'll just go through some of the images. There was this interesting kind of front coming in and an interesting cloudscape. We got our kites pumped up. I love photographing kiteboarding because it's so colorful. So I took my Nikon Z6, and again, I'm sort of testing it for weather sealing. So being out in the wind, salt water, sand blowing is a really good, durability test of it. So far, it's been holding up great. I was out with my good buddy John Wilbur, my good friend Miguel. There's Miguel with his kite launched, and John and my kites there, and Miguel's wife Jasmine. Miguel's a rocking kiteboarder. He loves to go huge, so it's fun just kind of photographing him, testing the wind, and flying over the beach. And there's Jasmine. She's such a stud for being out there, and there's her taking off. I waded out kind of into about mid-thigh deep water in my dry suit, and lined up just where I thought she'd be headed, and got a nice close shot with my little 24-70 on the Nikon Z6. I absolutely love this lens. Let's see, I probably was shooting it wide open. Yep, f4, crazy lens. Here's me launching my own kite. Miguel was going out to test it. And then towards the end of the day, the sun was kind of out behind that cloudscape. I thought it was just a really beautiful scene, and I kind of wanted to capture that beach there at the Fort Stevens Pond with the sun in the scene, Saddle Mountain in the background, and our kites. It was really nice kind of backlight. I thought, what a cool scene. And so it was really too high contrast to capture in a single frame. So I took my camera and just put it into a bracketing mode, and I've been kind of, it's not going to be a stellar landscape shot. It's more just sort of to remember a kiteboarding day. But I've been practicing with doing HDRs that are 2 stops apart, and it's been working great. But I thought, with the increased dynamic range that we have in our latest sensors, why not try 3 stops apart? So I took a shot on the meter. It looked like there was plenty of shadow detail captured in it. And so I set it up to take 1 shot on the meter, 1 shot 3 stops underexposed, and just handheld, carefully, keeping level, keeping straight, shot a series of 10 bracketed sets on the meter, 3 stops underexposed, and just thought, I wonder how these are going to turn out. And believe it or not, just selecting that whole series in Lightroom and telling it to merge an HDR pano did a beautiful, beautiful job. I even kind of timed one of the shots to have this guy kiting by in the background, one of the locals that was out there. And I'm just blown away what a great job it did. zooming in on him, let me see if I go into full resolution here. This is a big file. You know, and that's the other great thing about a Pano. Not only did I get a wider scene than I could have otherwise, there's two kites out there. I'm also taking a 24 megapixel camera, and I wound up capturing a nearly 60 megapixel image here. So much more enlargeable. So fun stuff. You know, the four of us had a beer and took off, and I'm driving home, and I started to notice that there's the edge of the cloudscape was just starting to light with some little bit of purple fringing on the clouds, and it was getting that kind of glow where you think, something cool is happening. And I was only about 5 minutes from the wreck of the Peter Iredale. It's kind of known as Shipwreck Beach. I was right there in Fort Stevens State Park where that is anyway. So I thought, you know, make a quick detour, and I actually called my friend John Wilbur, and he dashed over with me. He was on his way home too, but I sent a text like, shipwreck, sunset, and the two of us dashed out there. And the other nice thing was it was just about high tide. That's also a nice time to be kiteboarding is on a more high tide where the water's a little deeper in those ponds. So everything was just kind of conspiring. And by the time I got there, the sun was just about setting through this crack in the sky. You know, I set up to kind of test that 2470 on the Z6 and sure enough got kind of a nice little sun star. It's a bit blown out. There's a little too much intense sunlight coming through right there. But it was just kind of a test shot. And the other thing I had with me, I had this little Bemro carbon fiber tripod with this new prototype by Kirk Enterprise Solutions that's kind of a leveling base that has a lot more leveling movement than most leveling bases. It's nice and light. It's got a big, huge bubble level on it. And the nice thing was, you know, I didn't have spiked feet, unfortunately, which I would normally have with me in my bigger camera kit, which is good for wet sand and shifting sand. So I'm working with rubber feet on this tripod. But, you know, as the sand would shift and the tripod would come out of level, all I have to do is turn this little ring, whoop, watch the bubble level, re-level. And so I was out kind of moving around in the shifting surf, you know, leveling just like that. Super simple with my fluid head. And then any movements that you make with the fluid head, once you're level there, you stay level. So, you know, I'll be talking about that once they come out with that leveling adapter. It's a really great solution for anyone thinking about switching up to a fluid head that has a standard set of tripod legs. Anyhow, it was really helping me. I was enjoying it. I'm like, wow, this is a great product. And so I was out there and, you know, I'm looking at the back of the camera, getting some great scenes, timing the waves. I didn't have a bunch of neutral density filters with me. I really had a lightweight camera kit, just sort of planning on photographing some kiteboarding. I did have a polarizer, so I slapped the polarizer on. I have my, my Hoya HD3 circular polarizer. And that let me cut about a stop and a half more. I got down to about a half a second. So I could blur a bit of motion. And I tend to like a half a second out in the ocean. So I got that on there, did some blurred wave shots. You know, and these are edited. I realized that, you know, I was blowing the sun out a little bit. Still a really nice shot, but they're blowing out a little bit. So I timed a wave where, you know, it was coming through and I bracketed the same thing. 3 stops underexposed and then right on the meter, so that I could later on blend those as an HDR. And you know, as the sun went down, I came off the tripod and started hand holding, took the polarizer off, went into aperture priority mode and just started shooting. You know, there's less intense light. I'm able to get the sun in there more. And then this family went out and was you know, walking around, and I got this nice shot of this family, and the father and son went out and were climbing around on the ship, and I got their email and took some shots of them. But what I want to do is go in and see and show you how I'm going to blend this bracketed set. So I've got these 2 images here. I'm going to select both of them here in Lightroom. And I'm just going to go ahead and under Photo Merge, I'm going to choose HDR. Boom. There we go. It's going to open the HDR Merge preview box. I've got the Show Deghost overlay on. That's why we've got all that red schmutz. And you know, I've already merged this before. I'm just going to show you the process. I found that if I did too much ghosting for the waves, I actually got some weird results around the ship, like it was trying to kind of do some stuff with the clouds in the ship. So I actually found that in this particular case, going a little bit low on the deghost worked out better for me in this particular. You know, you always have to do a little trial and error. If you're getting any weird results with an HDR Merge, whether you're using Lightroom or whether you're using on one, or whoever you're doing your HDR with, Aurora, you know, try different deghosting amounts because you're going to get slightly different results every time. So I went ahead, I found that low worked best for me on this particular one. I want to auto align the images because at this point, I was on the tripod, but the sand moving under your tripod, I had taken off my shoes, rolled up my pant legs, and was waiting. And so the sand shifting around is moving the tripod slightly between frames. And I'm going to go ahead and choose Create Stack. I want to stack that HDR image in with the original underlying images. And I'm just going to go ahead and click Merge, and it's going to render that HDR image here in the background. You know, and I'm not a huge fan of the foreground of that image, but I've got a couple of my favorites right here, and I could pick either one of those. So, you know, I think I'm going to go with this one, and we'll work on blending that in with those images in Photoshop. I'll show you how that works out. So here we go. We've got our HDR image right here. I'm going to go ahead and open that stack up by clicking that little number 3. And if I hit Shift Tab here, I can bring up, this is the HDR, put it on the very top. You can tell because it says HDR. And I'm going to go ahead and go into Develop. And I want to close down my film strip because I want a nice big view of the image. And you know, one thing, I'm going to go ahead and pull the whites back a little bit. I don't expect to have a lot of detail in the sun, but I also don't want it to be pure white. If it's pure white, then if I go to print it, it's not going to put any ink down on the paper at all. So I'm just going to move the whites and the highlights back just enough that it's not pure white. And I'm going to boost the shadows and see if that's enough to get me the shadow detail I want in this image. And it really isn't. So I'm going to bring those back again. I'm going to move exposure up, which is going to be brightening the entire image, obviously. I'm going to pull the shadows up, pull exposure up a bit, and I'm really watching the detail here in the ship. It's done a nice job with the ghosting. Even at low ghosting, the waves all look nice and consistent across the frame here. It's looking good to me. So I'm going to go ahead and boost the shadows a little bit more. Yeah, boosting exposure a bit. Now we've lost some detail in the sun again, but that's as easy as pulling highlights back a little bit more, pulling whites back a little bit more. It's kind of a little seesaw back and forth there. And it's really brightened that sky up above, which is not what I intended. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my graduated local adjustment filter right here. I'm going to click and drag down so that's being applied to the upper part of the image. And you can see this is kind of the kind of feather, the transition zone between those lines. The effect will be completely applied above the line and not applied at all below the line. I don't need as big a feather because I'm going to show you one thing I love that they've done with Lightroom is this range mask. I'm going to use luminance, and I'm basically creating a little luminosity mask here on the fly. I want to pull exposure back to about where I want that sky to look. It's a little bit darkened again. I'm going to boost contrast a little bit up in there. I'm going to boost saturation a little bit. And then what I want to do is with this luminance mask, I'm just going to grab the lower, when I grab this lower range, I'm excluding the darker parts of the histogram, the darker spectrum. So darker tones are being eliminated from that filter being applied. You can see suddenly the clouds are coming out of it. They're gray instead of red. And now if we turn that show mask off, now it's really just being applied to the blue. None of it's on the ship, none of it's on those darker clouds, and I can really adjust just the part of the image that I want. Super, super powerful. It's really nice to have that bit of range masking in there. So now it's looking more balanced again to me. I'm going to close that filter down, that local adjustment graduated filter down. And I might pull contrast back just a little bit here. I want to see a little bit more shadow detail in here. I don't want my shadows to be quite as dark. It's got that rusty, there's details in those shadows, and I like that. So then what I'm going to go ahead and do, I might go into my hue, saturation, and luminance sliders just a little bit and make the luminance of the blues just a little bit darker yet, just a smidge. Boost just the blue saturation a little bit, and that's looking really good. So I'm going to go ahead and call that done. I use those targeted adjustment tools. If you just click on these little tools, so if I want to change saturation, I can hover over the color I want to change, click and drag up to make it more saturated, drag down to make it less saturated. Really, really powerful little tools. So I'm going to go back into the library view. I'm hitting the E key, which is the loop view in the library. And I want to take this image. Actually, let's go into the grid view. And I'll close down this right panel too. You can always hit the tab key to open and close the panels on the sides. I want to take this HDR image and process it the same way I've done this. And I tend to do my finish editing, my processing in On1 Photo Raw 2019 in its effects app. So I'm going to go into On1 Effects 2019 and open that. I'm going to create a new PSD file that I want to edit. And I'm going to create a ProPhoto RGB color space Photoshop document in 16 bits that I want to take in there, a big, wide, really, really high quality master editing image. And I'm going to create that copy to take into Photoshop. So it's going to create that new Photoshop document, take it into On1. I'm going to open it up in here, in Effects. And I've got a whole bunch of presets in here. I have winter presets. It's wintertime right now, so I tend to do these sort of seasonal presets. I could look in some others too, but you know, a first step for me, I like to make these effects presets, and I use them a lot as a starting point when I'm editing images. And I like to use this quick view browser. I'll just click it, and I can press the plus key on my keyboard to get a bigger view of each one. And I'm really looking at the sky and how the shadows on the ship look. And I kind of like the way the shadows are opened up in this Fitzroy sunset image without losing any of the blue detail in the sky. You know, the oranges are not turning too red like some of these others. I like that one, Fitzroy sunset. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. I'm going to close this panel down so we get a bigger view of the image. And then I don't want to do a whole lot. It looks really good. You know, one thing I can always go through here and tweak this or that. You know, maybe the shadows are boosted a little more than I need here, so I can back those off just a hair. Yeah, that's a little bit nicer look. Maybe contrast is boosted a little more than I need. Pull it back just a touch. I think the dynamic contrast is doing a lot for this image, really making things pop. I can look at what's happening in each individual color channel in this color enhancing filter that I've added. So I can go in here and maybe boost saturation even a little bit more in the blues, drop the brightness. I could look at the oranges and say, it moved it just a little bit towards that red hue. I can pull that back just a little bit. Just a few little tweaks and adjustments. I always view a preset as a starting point, not necessarily a finishing point. I'm going to call that good. If I look at what it looked like before and after, it's subtle, but it's a real nice touch there. So I'm going to go ahead, click Done, and that will round trip me back into Lightroom, and it's going to stack that image in with the other HDR files. It'll just be a little bit closer to ready to finish off and blend with one of the other images that I've already finish edited the same way in Photo Raw. I really view my editing process as a two-step process. I've got the raw processing where I just get the tones and the colors right, and then I'm going to create either a virtual copy or a new PSD file to take and finish edit. And again, you know, On1 Effects is my finish editing platform of choice. It's just so easy to get the look that I want and really make my images pop. So come out of there, and we're back here in Lightroom, and we've got this edited image as the top of our stack now. If we take a look, there it is. We might want to just jump into develop. I want to make sure, yep, that's what I thought. Sometimes after I do my finish editing, I'll find that I've pushed a few of those highlights into the pure whites, and so I'll just pull that back just a touch. There we go. So now we don't have any pure white in the image to worry about when we're printing. And I'm going to go back into the grid view by pushing G, and that takes me back into Libraries grid view. And I'd really like to blend this image right here with this water foreground. And there's a little bit of trickiness because you can tell in these two images that, you know, they're composed differently. The sun's a little closer to the ship in this one. And I'm gonna want to have that reflection of the ship here in the foreground, but I'm gonna wanna be kind of careful not to blend too much of this where the sunlight is playing across the water, you know, maybe just a little bit on that lip. So we'll take them both into Photoshop. The way I'm gonna do that is by just hitting Command and selecting the two of them, then right-clicking them, and I'm going to say Edit In, and I'm going to run down to Open as Layers in Photoshop. And it's going to just open a new Photoshop document with those two photos as separate layers on it. All right, boom, here we are in Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the Tab key because I have all my panels hidden right now. You can see we've got the two layers. It brought in that HDR image as well as that single frame image, which is sitting on the top. And what I want to do first is kind of line the two of those up. So I'm going to just drop the opacity of that top layer so that I can see the underlying layer through it. I'm going to make sure I have my Move tool here. And as you can see, they are kind of differently sized, aren't they? So I'm going to go ahead and it's not badly lined up. I just need to think about where I want that transition to be. You know, knowing that, you know, if I stop short, I'm going to lose a little bit of resolution on the lower part of this. And honestly, I'm pretty okay with that. I just want to make sure I don't have, that's pretty good right there. Right about there. So I'm going to move like that. And then the next thing I want to do, I'm going to hit the Tab key again. I'm going to grab my crop tool. And I just want to move in. One nice thing with Photoshop is it'll pretty much snap where you want it. I want to snap right there to where I don't have to worry about cropping it later. I'm going to snap to the usable part of the image where we have an overlap of both images completely within the boundary of my crop. I'm going to go ahead and hit the crop button. It's taking it a second. Boom, there we go. Might even do it one more time. We'll crop from the top right here and just stop. There's a little bit of blank canvas there on the right side. I just want to move it a little bit. I could move over. There we go. Just about like that. There we go. All right. So it looks a little weird right now. Bear with me. I'm going to turn the opacity back up on that top layer to 100%. And then what I want to do is I'm going to go into my layer menu and I want to put a hide layer mask on here. I'm going to go down to layer mask and I want to hide all. And that's going to put a black mask over the top of that foreground image. And then what I want to do is go ahead, I've got that mask activated. I want to have a white brush. So if your brush isn't white, you can just click on this. You know, if you have some other color selected, let's say you'd used your eyedropper and you have blue selected or you know, any one of a number of different colors. You could just click right here and you'll get a black and white. You can switch between painting black and painting white. And when you paint black or white on the mask, you're revealing the image with white and you're hiding the image with black. Right now it's completely hidden because it's a pure black mask. I want to grab my brush and there's some settings that are really important. I want 100% opacity and I want a really soft edge brush. So when I click up here in my brush settings, I want that hardness to be at 0. So now that I've got that set, I like using my Wacom tablet. I have a little portable photo version right here that I like to use when I'm on the road or when I'm using my laptop. I have a bigger Intuos Pro back at my desktop, but I really like the feeling of painting with the Wacom tablet. So it's pressure sensitive. The harder I press, the larger the brush. And I'm just brushing that foreground image with that reflected foreground in. And I make a few strokes and then I'll let off. That way, you know, if I do something I don't want, I can always go back by just pressing undo. The Command Z, Control Z for you PC users will just take me right back to, and just back to where I was before I made an errant brush stroke. So lots of smaller brush strokes are the key. You can see by painting just that little bit in, I'm not painting in that big bunch of the sky. That looks really good to me. That's exactly what I want, just that reflecting foreground. I don't mind having some of the flotsam out there beyond that little lip of water. Now, you know, to show you, if I went too far and I painted that in, then we'd see, ooh, the sun's not aligned, right? I'm gonna go ahead, hit Command Z like I just talked about, back to normal. Now you can see that foreground is just a little bit darker than the background. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, I'll hit Tab. We make sure we've gonna make sure that this image right here, this layer is selected. And I wanna go Image, Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. And, oh, wait, actually I can go ahead and hit Tab so I can see the image while I'm doing it. Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. And we're only working on that one layer and only on that masked part of that one layer. So I'm gonna go ahead and just move the brightness up. I'm just gonna brighten that foreground image to match the background image that we're working with. And you know, we could change the contrast too. We can make it less, make it more. I think a little bit more is nice. Boom. There you go. Well blended, done. All I got to do is hit Command S, Control S for you PC people. And that's gonna save that layered file with all of my work back into Lightroom. And I basically have my finished image that I was after. So I think, you know, some of the key points from all this is remembering that if you're out in a really high contrast situation and you look at the back of your camera, you know, shooting raw is one way to capture more dynamic contrast or more dynamic range and be able to go in and adjust later. But some scenes like this where the sun's right in the scene and you've got dark shadows like the ship that you want to capture, there's really no way that you're going to get that in a single frame. And looking at your histogram, if you see the data spreading off both sides like I did shooting this, you know, I know the ship is off in pure blacks and there's a spike on the left of my histogram in the pure black area. And the sun is way off to the right in the sky and there's quite a bit of data going right off the right and there's a big spike on the right and data spread all the way across. Well, that's a good time to think about bracketing and capturing in HDR. And, you know, I've for quite a while been advocating 2 stops is plenty in between each frame for capturing HDR. Well, you know, this showcases that 3 stops is plenty, close enough with the modern sensors. It worked out just great, both in that panorama of the kites that I captured, as well as this scene of the shipwreck at sunset. So, you know, just something to keep in mind. Have that camera ready to set up in bracketing mode. If you can use a tripod, it's going to be a lot better and easier to blend in post-production, more chance of getting it right. And wow, you know, I mean, I love when something like this happens unexpectedly. I didn't go out necessarily to do much photography besides take some photos of my friends and I kiteboarding. And, you know, luckily I threw just enough equipment in. I had this little tripod thrown in the back with me just because I've been testing it. I had my Z6 with just my 24 to 70 millimeter lens, and in the kit with it, just because I knew it was supposed to be a sunny day, I'd thrown in a polarizer really for shooting kiteboarding. But that equipment was enough for me to be able to get down to a half a second, do some bracketed HDR work with the shipwreck, and it worked out great. So, you know, would I rather have had waders to be super comfortable in the cold water and some neutral density filters to maybe really slow everything down to mist around the ship? Well, that would have been fun. But, you know, I had the tools that I had and I used them. So I think having stuff with you, being out there, that's the key. You know, and just keeping your eye peeled for that moment. I was driving along and I looked up to the west and over the brush alongside the road, it just looked like the sky was doing something interesting. And in my mind I went, Haystack Rock, too far away. Shipwreck, pretty close, I could probably make it, worth a try. I pulled in just in time. So you guys, there were a number of questions from last week's Approaching the Scene about shooting out in the snow, and one of them was funny when someone was asking me just about my van. What are the specs? Sounds like a diesel motor. Yeah, that's my big El Jefe, the Sprinter van. I take that on all my photo workshops that I do in the West. The only 2019 workshops that van won't be at are going to be Patagonia and Charleston, South Carolina, and in those we'll rent minivans for everybody to be comfortable in. But El Jefe is awesome. It seats 12. There's still a queen-size bed behind the back seat and cargo room underneath that. And it's pretty great to all roll around school bus style, like a big horde jumping out to photograph stuff. And for the family, it's an amazing vehicle. And yes, it's a diesel and gets over 20 miles to the gallon, which is just awesome. So that was one big question I had. Another was about what lens I was photographing with. A lot of people asked if that portrait of my wife Stacy in last week's Approaching the Scene, that sort of cover image for the video, was photographed with one of my more portrait-oriented lenses on the FTZ adapter. But it's not. It was photographed with the little 24 to 70 kit lens that sucks back into itself and gets nice and compact when you're traveling with it. That lens that they've basically released the Z cameras with that you can buy as a kit. And I'll tell you, the more I use this lens, the more enamored I am with it. If you get close to your subject, it focuses close, like that portrait of Stacy. So that was shot at 24 millimeter, or no, at 70 millimeters at f4. I got pretty close to her. The background blurs in a really nice way, and it's razor sharp at f4, edge to edge. A really, really great little lens. I can't recommend it highly enough. And a number of people are asking me what I'm still thinking about the Z6, and I'm going to do a sort of a little bit of a longer term report back on that, along with some of the ways that I've determined I like setting it up after having used it for a while. But I can tell you, it's in my hand more than any other camera right now. If I was going out to photograph action specifically, or images for ultra high resolution printing, huge, you know, some professional project where it needed to be giant prints, I'm going to take the 850 or the D500 if I'm doing action and sports, wildlife, just for the you know, the autofocus is a little bit better at tracking fast moving motion and shooting bursts. But for just having a good time shooting with and working in low light, it's my favorite camera ever. And I'm doing this video with it right now. It does a wonderful job of keeping my face in focus while I'm working with videos. I can even move around the scene and it keeps me tracking. And the video quality out of it is astounding. The cool announcements, they just announced the 14 to 30 f4 lens for the Z camera system, the S lens. I have that as one of the early pre-orders, so I'll let you know what I think about that when it gets here. And also that they're going to allow the Z6 and the Z7 to shoot ProRes RAW to an Adamus 5, Ninja 5 external monitor, which I have, and that'll be fun to test out. So lots of fun stuff to come. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys are enjoying, please click like, please click subscribe. Again, if you have questions, throw them in the comments section here on YouTube, or send me an email at questions@hudsonhenry.com. So thanks so much, everybody, and we'll see you next week.